Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, has unveiled a series of changes to the migration and asylum system. The UK is now looking to Denmark as inspiration for a stricter, harsher approach to immigration. Asylum seekers will have to wait 20 years before applying to settle permanently. Asylum seekers will be forced to return to countries the government now considers safe, including Syria. And asylum seekers' assets could be seized to pay for processing costs. The plans, which have been trailed over the weekend, have been met with scorn from within the Labour Party. This approach isn't just morally wrong, the MP Richard Burgeon tweeted earlier today, it's politically disastrous. Ethan, tell us, what are the specifics of what Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, has announced?
Well, what you set out there is pretty much they're the headline proposals. She also spoke in the Commons about various bits and bobs she wants to change, like Article 3 and Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights.
She wants to try and change those articles?
She wants to try to use domestic legislation to basically... So we're staying in the ECHR. But she basically wants to tighten up the interpretation of these by judges, and also potentially kind of do some renegotiation with the Council of Europe about what it all means. But basically, Article 3 is the torture and degrading treatment bit, and Article 8 is the right to family life.
So this is the key area of European legislation that people like Dominic Cummings, people like Chris Philp, Kemi Badenoch, people like Nigel Farage say you cannot grip the asylum issue unless you leave the ECHR, unless you leave its jurisdiction. And Mahmood is saying, I disagree, and this is my legislative fudge for getting around it. Yeah.
I mean, there isn't a bill yet. This is the first. This is sort of heads of the proposals, but she thinks the problem is that. So, for example, with Article 3, she said, "Torture's bad. We hate torture." With the Labour Party, obviously, that's true. But degrading treatment is too. The second bit of Article 3 is too sort of broadly drawn. So, she said that it's the case that judges adjudicating deportation cases will rule that you can't be sent back to the country you came from because they might put you in a prison cell that's too small, and that's degrading treatment. Or they might put you in a prison that doesn't have adequate mental health provision, and that'll be counted as degrading treatment. And then similarly on the Article 8, the right to family life, she says, this should be something which we should interpret as, immediate family, and serious cases, what she would define as kind of the thing, the really obvious cases of union between, parents and children. And she says, it's being applied to a wider family. I mean, there's this famous case that the Telegraph always bangs on about, which is, the chicken nuggets thing. I don't know if you know about this one. This guy, this Albanian guy who saying, apparently said that because his children or his child didn't like chicken nuggets in continental Europe, couldn't go back. It's not, I mean, it's obviously not as clear cut as that. But it's one of those kind of tabloidy cases that people talk about a lot.
I can see why that might animate the Telegraph's readers. One of the things that it's often quite hard to pick up on when you're watching the stream, as I was earlier today, is the mood in the chamber. And I don't want to get too inside baseball with it, but I think one of the key things that we're going to talk about in this episode is the reaction of Labour MPs to this statement. And when I was watching on the stream, very rarely do you get the opportunity. You were there, I wasn't, so we can compare our notes now, right? But it seemed to me that the vibe was off, that the Labour MPs were not boisterous. It sounded like they were doing their bit, and when she finished her statement, they sort of cheered her. But other than that, it felt quite somber. It felt quite heavy. It wasn't a parliamentary party that was sort of chomping at the bit to support their Home Secretary. Is how I've interpreted the video stream and listening with a pair of headphones, how it felt when you were in the room.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things to say, I suppose. It's like we today on the website have got a tracker, and that tracker is showing all of the Labour MPs who have come out publicly and said that they basically oppose these plans. And then there are a number of other Labour MPs who've said, off the record to myself and to our New Statesman politics team colleagues, they're uneasy about this, or they're waiting to see before they make a decision.
Currently, the tracker has 18 MPs who've gone public,
which is, I mean, let's be honest, this is a parliamentary Labour Party with 405 MPs in it, so you have to keep a sense of proportion about this. It's not anywhere near the scale of the rebellion around welfare. But
still nearly 5% of the parliament gone public, and a lot of them before she'd even stood up to address the House.
Yeah, and the second thing I would say is that potentially this slightly flat mood is, a lot of Labour MPs basically realise that while they might not be like personally comfortable cheerleading for this kind of stuff, the political situation is a dire one, and they've been told by their Home Secretary and by their leader that this is necessary. They have to sort of, to use a cliche, grasp the nettle or whatever you want to say, clutch the bramble. But it's sort of it's sort of pitched in those terms. So it's not a kind of bread and butter Labour Party kind of proposition.
No, it's certainly not. I mean, I just to give listeners a sense of the feeling among MPs, Tony Vaughan, who I'm told not typically a sort of rebel, quote, "The rhetoric around these reforms encourages the same culture of divisiveness that sees racism and abuse growing in our community." Stella Creasy, MP, says, "This is not just performatively cruel, it's economically misjudged." Simon Ofer, "We should push back on the racist agenda of reform rather than echo it." I would say the stereotypical tendency of a Labour MP is to not talk about immigration in the way that Shabana Mahmood is talking about it. And I do think rhetoric is important on this. Certainly these policies aren't what you would describe as typically of the left. My analysis is that Mahmood, Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer, the keystone, if you like, of securing a second term for the Labour Party, they are aware they have to grip the border and law and order. And that if they are not seen, and actually I think that's the operative word, are not seen to do that, reform will just have a heyday, authoritarian policies, pronouncements, etc. And I think it really should be emphasised here how much of a departure this is from the Labour Party's thinking on the past, and actually the rhetoric that Mahmood used in the chamber could be interpreted in that way, because it has echoes of a speech from another famous Labour figure, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, that was a weird. That was a sort of side note thing that I noticed, which is that she started the speech by talking about this might be real kind of. I've only been here 3 months, but I spent too much time with the New Statesman because she started to talk about the grotesque chaos of asylum seekers being housed in hotels and then shuttling around in taxis. And obviously without the Welsh accent, it reminds you very strongly, because it's using the same words as the sort of speech, 40 years ago now, Neil Kinnock made it, in that kind of militant speech where he said, the grotesque chaos of a Labour council hiring taxis to go around the city, handing out redundancy payments to its own workers. It's an
iconic speech, right? In the history of the Labour Party, it's kind of a meme since.
Yeah, I'm sort of, obviously we've only really just got off the chamber, so I'm trying to get to the bottom of why that line appeared. I mean, it probably wasn't inadvertent plagiarism. There's, a reason
no, of course, but if it were to be a deliberate invocation,
if we were to interpret at this early stage why they would use a speech that is famous for being a major dividing line in the history of the Labour Party, in which, the leader essentially says it's time to think again about the way we've been approaching politics for the last few years, and kind of like wonder if we have to slay a few sacred cows or whatever it might be, then you could interpret it in that way. We'll probably have to wait until we come to a definitive conclusion about that, and I'll be writing about that in the coming days as we kind of digest this statement and the reaction to it. But just on the point about language in general, it's worth saying that Shabana Mahmood, in response to the attacks from both her own backbenchers and also from the Liberals around kind of stoking division and racial tension, she very clearly says, I'm actually a sort of child of the post Rivers of Blood, Birmingham, and I've sort of been called. I mean, she used a particularly horrible slur in the House of Commons, sort of in a moment of passion,
quoting abuse that she'd received, right?
and was sort of asked to apologise for it by the Deputy Speaker because of the violence of the language. But it's something which she said repeatedly and did so again in the House of Commons, that she is somebody who's been on the receiving end of racism, and her view is that if the Labour Party sort of quote unquote, puts its fingers in its ears and doesn't sort of just thinks that it can find a way around this issue without sort of going head on, tries to neutralise rather than sort of attacking, then that kind of atmosphere will actually flourish rather than diminish.
Yeah, I will. For the sake of specificity, she said she was directly quoting someone, and she said, "I was called a fucking," and then a word that begins with P that is an ethnic slur for people from South Asia. Response to the speech and the announcements that were trailed in the media before this Commons statement, and I think perhaps the willingness of the Speaker to permit urgent questions before the statement may have been a little bit of parliamentary bitchiness, perhaps, showing his displeasure. The Sunday Telegraph revealing a lot of this. Shabana Mahmood doing the same on the Laura Kunzberg show on Sunday. Some people are supportive. I think it's possibly the first time that both Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage have said things that aren't wholly negative about a Labour Home Secretary. Tell me a little bit more about the reaction to the speech. I mean, the obvious place to start maybe is Kemi Badenoch and her statement.
Kemi Badenoch was remarkably generous. She even offered to lend her own MP's votes to Shabana Mahmood to get this thing through, and it eventually materialises into a proper bill. She said that the Tory party has kind of been through this whole thing of, trying to tackle border security, asylum claims, the immigration system, and that they'd struggled with it. And obviously this was kind of wrapped up as a gift, but it was just a series of jibes, really. I mean, she was basically saying, look, your backbenchers are not going to swallow this, and you're going to end up with some kind of rebellion on it.
It's a
the size of that rebellion is kind of a question, but
yeah, we'll be interested to talk about that in a second. It's a parliamentary trick that Starmer used to pull a lot as leader of the opposition, and I wonder if it's a sign of Badenoch, the parliamentary performer, perhaps finding her feet a little bit more. He would often say to his Tory counterpart, we support these measures, but they don't go far enough. And I'm glad that they've adopted these components of our agenda, but they also need to do X, Y, and Z.
Meet with me and talk
exactly.
Through, But she did say that, by the way. But the problem is the offer came wrapped up with a meeting with Chris Philp as well.
It's tough sell that, isn't it? Yeah, tough sell. Last time I was in the same room as Chris Philp, he called me insane. Right.
I mean, sorry, I'm not attacking Chris Philp. I just mean Shabana Mahmood and Chris Philp obviously have a slightly Punch and Judy relationship, which was demonstrated earlier in the day when they had Home Office oral questions. And then when Kemi Badenoch stood up to do the response, Mahmood made a joke about how
he'd been subbed out.
Yeah, because of his performance in the earlier exchange.
Okay, so let's talk about that broader reaction then. Is there a caucus of Labour MPs who support it? Do we expect the Labour MPs in opposition to expect that number to grow? Let's talk a little bit more about the response.
Well, yeah, it's worth saying there is a caucus of Labour MPs who support this, and there's both what you might characterise as the kind of blue Labour group. I mean, actually, I don't need to sort of say characterise. They are indeed a group now, and they're organising and they're getting more members and trying to build their presence. And their kind of leading figures were very enthusiastic about this. And, Maurice Glassman, the leader of Blue Labour, who's in the House of Lords, is apparently going around these days calling Shabana Mahmood a gift from God. He thinks she's brilliant. And then there's a kind of wider, what you might call the more pragmatic group, who maybe, as we said before, aren't necessarily like, popping champagne corks over this, but they think it's necessary. And then you have a kind of core contingent of basically left-wingers who don't like it. I suppose what we really need, actually a lot of Labour MPs said earlier in the day, before the statement was made, either I'm going to wait for the statement or I'm going to wait for the full proposals. I'm going to wait for the bill before I kind of start making really big public statements on this. And I think that's what you'll see. And also you've seen the kind of what you might describe as the soft left part of the party breaking in different ways, or in their kind of original reactions to it in slightly different ways, based, on what the political situation they face in their MC is often. So there are kind of soft left MPs who do have reform knocking on the door in second place now. And I've heard from a few of those saying that, they're basically quite in favour of this, despite their general outlook, left-leaning stuff on other issues.
It's worth explaining as well for listeners who perhaps don't speak Labour factionalism. Yeah. Blue Labour, a caucus on the right of the party, Glassman, I believe actually the only figure from the Labour Party invited to Trump's inauguration.
Yeah.
Is viewed very favourably by figures of the sort of the MAGA right, and there's a bit of a MAGA whisperer, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would just say on Blue Labour. I'm sorry, this is a bit Labour Party and it is a bit inside baseball. But the thing is with the Blue Labour group is like if you describe them as right wing, they get quite annoyed, and I do slightly understand it, because some people on Blue Labour are like, yeah, I am quite right wing on the social conservative stuff and on things like immigration, but actually, when you talk to me about economics, I'm essentially a Benite.
Yeah.
And industrial strategy, kind of massive rejuvenation of manufacturing in Britain, tariff wars, all these kind of ideas straight out of the 1976 alternative economic strategy, the Labour economic policy that never was, drafted by Tony Benn. Those kind of ideas, they're much more in favour of that sort of thing. So I think a straight characterisation of them being right wing, they might sort of resile against that and say, actually, there are some people who are socially liberal in the Labour Party, but their economics are much more right wing. They're kind of PFI guys and
Yeah, of course. We're always struggling for definitions, and increasingly that left-right axis seems a misplaced spectrum through which to understand politics. But you would have to say that they're on the right of the Labour Party, and actually that sort of left-wing economic agenda, right-wing on cultural issues, or socially conservative, economically more left-wing. That is the Steve Bannon economic nationalist populism. Right? That is that strain of MAGA, and that is why Glassman's there, right? It is, Bannon famously, MAGA's on Medicaid, supports the welfare state, nationalisation of key industries, very right wing on cultural issues, versus, we've got a few more factions now emerging as this talk of a leadership contest increases, a Tribune group of MPs representing the soft left, mainstream, and this sort of Manchesterite faction, as they would be described in the New Statesman, and there are others, obviously, previous things like Labour Together, etc. Is Kemi Badenoch's response relevant? When I think about who's going to be out in broadcast media after this, Farage, Shabana, and I almost, as we were talking about our editorial planning in our editorial meeting this morning, I just glossed over Kemi and sort of thought, well, do we even need to talk about her response to this? Because it does feel like there's two seats at this table, one occupied by the unofficial opposition in Nigel Farage and Reform, and actually possibly as the next leader of the Labour Party, and possibly Shabana Mahmood.
Yeah. She's relevant, I suppose, for two reasons. One of which is she's relevant for the same reason that Farage is. And also, sadly, I suppose, in some ways, for the same reason that Tommy Robinson is, although I'm obviously not grouping those three people in the same sort of politics, but in sense of people in the Labour Party looking to their right, and in obviously one case to their very far right, and seeing kind of positive mood music and happy noises about this, and that creating a sort of antibody reaction and hardening the opposition of people in the Labour Party, perhaps because they're like, why are we running stuff that's pleasing these awful people from their perspective? But the other reason Kemi is important, I suppose, is that she does kind of, sort of technically command the support of nearly 120 MPs in the House of Commons. So if the push did come to the shove, would Tory votes get through a bill like this? Probably not. I mean, it's not really how things work. They'd probably just abstain if there was going to be a Labour rebellion and let the government take the hit and the embarrassment of it. But I suppose, if you were to make a case for the irrelevance of the leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition, that would be what you would say.
It's an interesting one for me from the aspect of party management as well, because obviously last week really bad week for the Labour Party. Abortive briefings about leadership challenges, a U-turn on a manifesto U-turn when it comes to Reeves and the income tax pledge. And I wondered if this was a little bit the McSweeney tendency in the Labour Party reverting to its safe space, punching hippies. You know, this tried and tested now political formula. Blair very good at it. Osborne and Cameron very good at it, of picking fights with the fringe of your party to signal to your allegedly your base, or in either of those. You know, so for example, Osborne and Cameron picking fights with the sort of Eurosceptic wing of the party in order to signal to centrists and moderates, you know, we are not like those people. Starmer's Labour Party, very good at provoking arguments with the left of its party, kicking Corbyn out of the party to signal, you know, we are normal, trust us with your vote. That tendency, the left-wing tendency in the party, is not as powerful and prevalent as it once was. Should we understand this week, Immigration Week, trying to reset the agenda, trying to get to a place where the Labour Party is more comfortable in picking fights to its left rather than perhaps necessarily its right?
Well, three slightly contradictory observations based on what you said.
Those are my favourite kind of observations, I think.
Well, no, I mean, just thinking about how this came about. I mean, first of all, it's been planned for a while.
Yeah.
So it would be overestimating the tactical genius of anybody in 10 Downing Street or indeed the Home Office to say that they basically pulled this hat out the bag just in order to get over the fact that last week was a complete shit show, car crash, clusterfuck. Sorry,
pick your words.
All words you can bleep bleep all of them out. So it's probably not that kind of 4D chess. But as you said, Immigration Week. I mean, it is a case of trying to flood the zone. I mean, I don't. This is going to be the last thing we're going to see this week in terms of immigration and asylum stuff. So you know, if you actually just flood the zone and give people something to talk about and pick a fight, then you know perhaps you head off some of the other sort of stories that could be dominating the news. But then the third thing to say is, you know, this actually. And we were discussing this in our editorial meeting, or at least afterwards, a few of the politics team were sort of talking about whether this actually was quite a dangerous moment at which to do this, given the political weakness of the government at this point after the events of last week, but also just the general context that we're in, to kind of do an incredibly bold, I use that oft-used euphemism in Westminster, bold, but basically, a big... argumentative step change at a moment of political weakness, which is going to piss off people in your party. Maybe that's quite a dangerous thing. But yeah, I mean, your observation is obviously correct that this is something which upsets the left more than it does the right. I mean, the government is constantly having arguments with people on the left, really. It's just that we don't they're not always the front page news. I mean, the kind of rolling campaign against the employment rights bill is extraordinary in the way that it's cut through, to the extent that you've got, supposedly impartial people on BBC money programs now saying, oh, well, you know, unemployment's really bad for the young people now because of the employment rights bill and stuff. Fine, make that argument, but like it's just presented as a kind of truism.
Yeah.
There is this rolling background war going on between the more kind of left-wing things that the government's doing and vested interest groups and businesses and whoever, you know, like renters' rights as well. I mean, we've had some really good pieces about renters' rights and what that's actually going to do, and the fact that it's quite a big thing.
Yeah.
So there is other stuff going on in the background. It's not a case. I don't think it would be fair to say that the government has simply got this kind of right-wing ratchet and it's constantly trying to, as they love to say, out reform. But yeah, on this particular case, it is the biggest story of the week so far, and it's only annoying one side in politics.
Yeah, you could.
Although there is a socially conservative case against this package of measures,
for sure,
which we were also discussing earlier today in our editorial meeting about, you know, the kind of notion that actually making people reapply for their asylum status every 2.5 years and making them wait 20 years until they can actually have security living in the country is very much the opposite of an integrationist social conservative argument for making people buy into the country and settle here and kind of put down roots.